Wherever you're listening in the world, it's a pleasure to welcome you to IsraelCast, the podcast powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. I'm Steven Shalowitz, reminding you that for over 120 years, Jewish National Fund USA has been the premier philanthropic movement for the land and people of Israel. While best known for planting trees in Israel, JNF USA contributes to Israeli life in so many ways, including community development in the Negev and the Galilee, preservation of heritage sites, supporting people with disabilities, and connecting high school and college students to Israel. To learn more and to see how you can contribute, do visit jnf.org. Once again, do visit jnf.org. Plus, if you haven't done so already, we'd love it if you subscribed, rated, and reviewed us. 5 stars, of course, and you can do so wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, we'd love it too if you shared the show within your orbit. All right, now it's worth asking the question, to what extent did the barbaric October 7th Hamas attack on Israel impact the country's economy? Well, here to address that question and more, we are joined on this episode by Dr. Efraim Chalamish. Now, Dr. Chalamish is an international economic law professor at NYU, senior advisor to multinationals, as well as a media commentator. He's the founder and president of the Global Center for Economic Development and Security. He's frequently involved in public service and diplomacy and has served as a board member and a permanent representative to the United Nations from the International Association of Jewish Lawyers. Dr. Chalamish was recently selected as the Rockefeller Foundation Bellagio Fellow and the American Council on Germany's McCloy Fellow on Global Trends. His articles have been published widely in the United States and throughout Europe. His numerous accolades include being named 36 under 36 by the New York Jewish Week and a future global leader by the French government. Now known as Effie to his family and friends, which I proudly call myself one of them. He joins us now on the line via Zoom. Welcome to IsraelCast, Effie. And we have so much to cover, and I really want to kick off our conversation by having you help us understand just how multinationals are managing risk when it comes to the Israeli market post-October 7th.
Great to be here. Very excited to be here. Thank you very much, Stephen, for having me. Very important opportunity. So you really raised a very critical question, because multinationals have been involved in the Israeli market for generations, and clearly since October 7, many multinationals ask themselves how they're going to react to the new reality. To be honest with you, at the end of the day, since the fundamentals of the Israeli economy are very, very strong when it comes to economic performance, innovation, and the number of multinationals actually active in the market, at the end of the day, if you look at the world today, most internationals keep investing in the Israeli market, and they have a very long view on the future performance of the market, hiring people locally and investing in local productions. However, at the same time, we're talking about international institutions where they have a very strict governance structure. So whether we're talking about boards, executive committees, etc., people have to make decisions on how to mitigate risk, and that's actually natural and expected. And indeed, at the end of the day, there are many ways to deal with that. Many of these internationals adjust to these contracts to make sure that the contracts themselves have provisions to deal with these kind of scenarios, like force majeure type of provisions. Many of these multinational companies are actually buying specific insurance products to deal with these kind of geostrategic risks. By the way, we see that not only in the context of Middle East and Israel, we see these kind of new realities all over the world today, and the insurance products in this specific sector are actually booming. So at the end of the day, whether we are talking about new insurance products, the ability to mitigate those kind of risks through the contract themselves, there are just very, very different ways to deal with that.
So generally speaking, what you're saying is that despite October 7th, the Israeli economy can really weather this storm.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, when these multinational companies are dealing with these kind of risk, it's always a combination of local approach with international approach. So for example, from the World Bank, IMF, institutions deal with these kind of scenarios to local or regional financial institutions, these kind of international institutions providing the liquidity and the support to make sure that when these kind of multinational companies have major events, they can tap into the support of the international community.
And then how have they been managing employment given any sort of disruption because of reservist service?
Of course, there is no secret here that many of the employees have to find the right balance between their service and their day job. To be honest with you, the market has been very, very resilient in many different ways. One is because of the history, people kind of get used to it, so they find ways to find the right balance between being away and serving their companies. At the same time, companies find ways to tap to existing talent to basically replace and support those who serve. And then finally, indeed, when it comes to startup and small companies, it's a little bit more challenging. But then it's really remarkable to see how people manage to do more and make more with less resources. It's almost like the magic and the DNA of the market.
And then we talked about multinationals, but then what about startups? What does that ecosystem look like then post October 7th right now?
So I would say the most challenging part of this story is to provide funding to much smaller companies, especially when it comes to pre-seed, seed money, and Series A. So I think those kind of smaller rounds, smaller companies, that's where the real challenge is. When it comes to bigger financing rounds, bigger companies, I think the market is a little bit more resilient and people tend to invest more in companies that already proved themselves. And clearly there is a risk there because usually about 4 or 5 years from now, you will see the results of success story of smaller companies and startups starting today. So I think the Israeli government understands that. And we've seen recently all types of initiatives led by the Israeli government and other agencies in order to provide funding specifically for much younger companies.
And Effie, I would have to imagine that post October 7th and the war and the challenges that Israel has been going through has actually generated ideas for startups.
Absolutely. I think you raise a very critical point here, Stephen, because historically, and it's not a new thing, especially during times of war and post-crisis, these kind of reality forces Israeli individuals, companies, institutions to be more creative, to do more with less, and find these kind of technologies that address the challenges of both the war in the front line and, of course, the people's homes, and to think about how to make the business sector more resilient. And we already see that. The best example is, for example, the transition of certain defense technologies from the military to the civil sector, in the sense that now we see more and more technologies moving around from the public sector to the private sector.
And just anecdotally, when I was in Israel in January and I did voluntary work in agriculture, and of course, many of the laborers went back to their home countries. Sadly, many of them were slaughtered on October 7th. And one has to wonder, is there a better way of mechanizing agriculture, for example? And I would have to imagine people are looking at something like that even right now.
Absolutely, from automation
Yeah.
to AI related technologies, people are thinking about ways to do more with less and to provide quick solutions, especially in light of these challenging times.
Right. So going back to sort of an international scenario, how have international credit agencies approached their credit ratings and what does it mean? What impact at all does it have on business and people's lives? Because we've been hearing a lot about that since October 7th.
Absolutely. So this part of the story got a lot of attention,
Mhm.
both locally and internationally, especially since quite often people try to connect between the rating itself and the performance of the economy, or how the economy going to perform over the next couple of years. The reality is that sometimes there is a gap between perception in market and reality. So going back to your question, indeed, a couple of credit rating agencies did downgrade Israel's rating, which, of course, in reality makes it a little bit more expensive to borrow in international markets. But to be honest with you, Israel managed to raise significant funding in international markets, and the demand for those kind of sovereign debt instruments was really, really significant. So at the end of the day, the new rating didn't impact significantly the ability of Israel to raise money in public markets. I can just tell you that, for example, in the last round, the demand for Israel's bonds, it was maybe, I think, 4 times the original expectation. And indeed, maybe it's a little bit more expensive, but it didn't hurt Israel's ability to borrow in international markets. And again, although the part of the downgrade is also the prediction how the economy going to perform over the next couple of months and years, and it's a little bit negative because people think about whether the Israeli government will be able to fund such a long war, because this is very unusual for the Israeli market to deal with such a long war. Plus, again, even if Israel is trying to raise taxes or to adopt all types of fiscal reforms, still, you can't really do it overnight. It's going to take time. And in between, you have to fund the war's expenses and the ability to support many of the individuals and the institutions that you referred to before. So I think at the end of the day, yes, the outline is the prediction is a little bit more challenging, but again, it didn't have huge impact on the ability of the Israeli government to deal with the war, and frankly, more importantly, with the economy more generally.
And so, Effie, where does Israel stand vis-a-vis its economic ties with Abraham Accord countries?
Sure. So, as we all know, the Abraham Accord was signed a few years before October 7, and the impact was very, very significant and very, very quick. We saw people on both sides of the aisle traveling in the region. We saw people trying to sign deals, both small companies, startups, and much bigger companies. Sectors are very diverse, from financial institutions, fintech, new energy and licenses. So it was very promising. One of the things that people were concerned about is whether midterm and long term, the October events will impact the ability of both economies to keep working with each other, for corporations to collaborate. And again, based on initial results, it doesn't seem like the impact is that negative. At the end of the day, maybe you hear less and less kind of big announcements about major deals. But even before that, the kind of culture in the region is to be a little bit careful about certain announcements and being more visible in certain parts of the economy. So I think probably once the things are improving on the ground, we're going to see more and more deals being announced. And I think, and it's not only me, I think many people who watch these kind of new Middle East carefully, they understand that we have a very bright future ahead of us. And the fact that the U.S. government, whether it's the current government, past government, future government, people are talking about normalization with Saudi Arabia, it just adds a very, very strong wind to the whole dialogue about the new Middle East, future of the Middle East, and the ability of Arab nations to trade with Israel more closely.
And you're bullish on that, of a new Middle East. I mean, we had Jonathan Medved a couple of years ago, clearly before the October 7th attack, and he talked about a high-speed train, for example, going from Tel Aviv to Dubai. In other words, you can get on in the morning in Tel Aviv, you can have your meeting in Dubai, and then you can take the train back home and have dinner back home in Tel Aviv. I mean, so you're bullish on something like this eventually manifesting.
Absolutely. Even before October 7th, both international institutions, multilateral organizations, individuals, companies on the ground, people have been talking about all types of major projects, from the new trade routes, going from the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, UAE, through Jordan, Israel, all the way to Asia. People were talking about energy pipelines to be able to produce and export energy resources regionally, and then to South Europe, of course, to address energy challenges, and I can go on and on and on. People have big dreams in the region. And the importance of these big dreams is that even if eventually some of these dreams will not materialize because of these significant financial expense, because of the logistical challenge of bringing all the parties together. This is very, very important by itself. It's market signaling. It tells the market that this is not a one country anymore. This is a regional story. It provides people with the inspiration, encourage them to come to the region and invest in the region. And frankly, as they start thinking about the next tenders, the next projects, basically the projects of the future, it creates a know-how economy. It basically forces people in Saudi Arabia, UAE, Israel, Jordan, and other places to start creating the know-how. So next time when we talk about public tender or when we talk about the next project, whether it's energy or, as I said before, new trade options, people understand that they have the talent in-house to basically build the infrastructure. And I'll just finish by saying that, people were very skeptical in the past about the ability to execute big projects. But look at the new East Med Energy Alliance market. The fact that, for example, in today's world, you have Israel, Cyprus, Greece, and Egypt collaborate on a daily basis, whether it's import energy, export energy, or building the pipelines and the infrastructure to support this kind of new Middle East. So I have no doubt that big dreams eventually will materialize.
And that's why we wanted to have you on, Effie, is to articulate this and to spotlight this, because so much of that good news, so much of that cooperation is getting drowned out in the media by the crazies that are out there on the streets. And so people don't recognize the fact that there is a lot of cooperation already going on.
Look, Stephen, at the end of the day, most people in the Middle East, they wake up in the morning, they need to feed their families, they need to consume energy, they need basic access to financial institutions. And those kind of stories still happen on a daily basis every day in the Middle East. And you're absolutely right. The current crisis, and as you said, the noise in the system sometimes really captures people's attentions regionally and also around the world. But it doesn't mean that the economy stops. As I mentioned before, most of the stories I just shared with your terrific audience, most of these stories keep going on because, again, the show must go on. And the Middle East story is much bigger than this conflict or that conflict.
Well, as you know, they say in the media, if it bleeds, it leads.
Exactly.
So there you go. So just staying in the region, though, also, if we can talk a little bit about Gaza, and in that context, how do you rebuild Gaza? What does economic cooperation look like for developing that area? I mean, does the UAE get involved? Does Turkey get involved? We can talk about Turkey separately, but I'm just wondering if you can address that, Effie.
Sure. So I think there's no doubt that the future of that region really depends on participation by other Arab players in the region. So although people have different views on what they call the day after, and many different people have different views on how it should look like, most people agree that the leading economies in the Arab world should be part of the story. So whether we're talking about the Saudis, or the UAE, or other players in the region, they should join forces and help to rebuild Gaza. It's important not only because of the level of financial commitment that you actually need to rebuild that region, like what we saw in Europe after the Second World War. It's not only about that. It's also about signaling. It's also about message. When you have major Arab economies telling the world, we believe in the future of the Middle East. Yes, we did have a crisis driven by extremist voices, but we believe that eventually the middle of the world will win, and we're part of it, and we're committed to the region. This is a big deal. So I think at the end of the day, most of the recovery story will be led by large Arab economies. How eventually it's going to play out, a lot of that is actually going to be decided by internal discussions within the Arab bloc, because again, here you're talking about internal Arab affairs and not necessarily international relations.
Israel's relations, economic relations with Turkey, no fault of Israel's, by the way, is absolutely in tatters. So how do you rebuild that?
Right. So Israel-Turkey relations, it's an interesting story. It's going up and down for many, many years. People think it's a new story now. It's been going on for a couple of generations. And at, at the end of the day, the countries are so close to each other geographically, culturally, supply chains. Many sectors, both in Turkey and Israel, are actually driven by supply chains from the other side. So I have no doubt that mid to long term, Israel and Turkey will continue and do a lot of business together. And even if you look at the numbers, at the end of the day, Turkey is a very important market for Israeli exporters and vice versa. Yes, indeed, sometimes local politics plays a big role, and I think both parties really try to make sure that although we see a crisis, they try to kind of make sure that the noise doesn't take over, and they focus on continue and build the kind of commercial relationships that I just described to you. So I think if I think about how the next couple of years, how it's going to look like, the examples that I gave before from energy or from trade channels, I think that we will see more and more Turkish companies and Israeli companies trying to focus on getting the business done without being influenced too much by political winds.
So, in other words, pragmatism will take over. That's what I'm hearing from you.
And I think that pragmatism has been part of the Turkish-Israeli story for many years. I mean, look at how the countries deal with the sensitive issues, from borders to energy alliances to other commercial interests.
Effie, I'm going to put you on the spot here. And if you're not comfortable answering this question, I totally understand it. We can certainly move on. But I want to talk about the United Nations because, as I mentioned at the top of the program, you were a permanent representative to the UN from the International Association of Jewish Lawyers. And I'm going to kind of open up the floor to you about the United Nations because as we see what has been happening there since October 7th, I mean, no surprise, of course, but just the level of vitriol is just, beyond the pale in my mind. And I'm just wondering if you'd like to weigh in on that.
I would make even a bigger point, which I spend a lot of time kind of thinking about disengagement and re-engagement when it comes to the relationship between Israel and international institutions in general, from the World Health Organizations to other UN agencies to sports association, you name it. Many of these institutions have change over the years, and certain countries kind of took over and prevented Israel from being just another player in the story. I think it's very important for the Israeli government to look very carefully, because each story is different, to think about whether the leadership is genuine, whether you can actually reform institutions, whether you want to change from within or just want to give up, move on, and maybe even create new institutions. It's not black and white, Steven. It's not one solution fits all, which unfortunately sometimes people claim when it comes to the challenge of rebuilding relationship between Israel and the United Nations. So I think bottom line, the current reality is challenging for them, but kind of mid-term, long-term, I think we should look at each one of these international institutions and think about ways to re-engage and to build avenues for Israeli leaders and other leaders to work more effectively within the international institution systems. But if you see in institutions where really from within it's almost impossible to reform, it's impossible to make a difference, I think that at some point you have to move on.
And what about UNRWA? What does Israel do about that?
Sure. So I think on this one, I think the official positions of both the UN and Israel, the Israeli government, I think the official positions are out there, and I think it really depends on eventually how the UN itself will be able to reform the institution.
So as we wind down our conversation, Effie, personally, you've been in Israel several times since October 7th, and I'm just wondering what sort of changes have you seen? A change in mood, for example, sentiment, if you can just give us the lay of the land from your perspective and from your experiences.
I think the most important thing is resilience. I think if you think about the first couple of weeks, people were shocked. The feeling was that 100% of the people should be fully dedicated to rebuilding reality and bringing things back to normal. I think now, kind of many months into this journey, I think you almost have two parallel realities. One is the pressure to finish the war as soon as possible and to be very effective in it, but at the same time to continue and build this fantastic story of innovation, of resilient economy, of making the world a better place by exporting all these great solutions for the world. And I think this is a big difference, moving from kind of a crisis management approach to crisis solution and just continue the same kind of tempo and energy that we all saw even before October 7th. That's the biggest change, and that's really the most dramatic sentiment that you can see in Israel today.
And so now, really, before we wrap, your one message for businesses that are thinking about doing business and engaging with Israel, what do you tell them?
First of all, you have to be part of the story. You have to be part of the story in the sense that if you care, if you want to get involved, there are many, many ways to do that. Whether it's visiting, investing in Israeli companies and Israeli innovations, and even if you don't have the resources or the time to be part of the story, there are many, many ways to be part of the story from around the world. So again, being engaged, being part of the story one way or another.
And you're bullish.
More than ever.
All right. Dr. Efraim Chalamish, we're going to leave it right there. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this episode of IsraelCast. Still lots more to discuss, so we look forward to having you back for a round two. How's that?
I love it, Steven. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much to you and your listeners, and I'm looking forward to visiting you back.
All right. And we'll have info about Effie on the show notes page of our website, jnf.org/IsraelCast. And of course, we do release new episodes of the show every other Wednesday. Mark your calendars. I don't know why you'd want to miss an episode. And of course, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Simply search for IsraelCast. It's that easy. And don't forget to rate and review us, 5 stars, of course, because that really helps with our rankings, which in turn make it easier for more people around the world to find us. Or you can always enjoy the show by visiting us at our website. Once again, after all these years, hope you got it. It's jnf.org/IsraelCast. Now, it takes a whole moshav to put IsraelCast together. For that, we thank Vivian Grossman, Dara Shapiro, JD Krebs, and Ellie Kodrin. Our editors are Jay Rothman and James Casada from Miratone Studios, right here in the very heart of New York City. And the music that you hear at the top until the program is titled My Eden. It's by the very talented Rafi Malkiel from his album Water on the Tzaddik label. IsraelCast is powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. For more info about JNF USA, do visit jnf.org. And if you'd like to write to us with story ideas or just to say hello, I know Effie would love to hear from you, and so would I. So do email us at israelcast@jnf.org. Meantime, I'm Steven Shalowitz. Thank you for tuning in and looking forward to having you join us on future episodes of IsraelCast.